Good evening and welcome to Liberal Judaism's Hot Potatoes session on Annexation 101. A hot topic indeed, especially at the current time. It's a topic that is in the news, and we felt it's important to have an opportunity for us to understand what is it that we're talking about when we speak about annexation in the context of Israel at the moment. So it's my pleasure to welcome with me tonight Yair Lootsteen. I'm going to introduce him in a moment. Just a few words about myself. I'm Rabbi Lea Mühlstein. I'm one of the rabbis in the liberal Jewish movement in the UK. I'm a rabbi at Northwood and Pinner Liberal Synagogue. And I'm also the international chair of Arzenu, which is the political voice of Reform Progressive and Liberal Religious Zionists within the World Zionist Organization. So it's my pleasure to welcome Yair this evening, who is our expert with us tonight. I'm just going to introduce Yair. Yair is the chair of the Israel Movement for Reform and Progressive Judaism and has been a board member there since 2013. Yair was actually born in England, in London, but grew up in Toronto, Canada, made Aliyah in 1979, and has since resided in Jerusalem. A lawyer, Yair served in the IDF's Military Advocate General Corps for 23 years, completing his term of duty in 2007 with the rank of colonel. He held several challenging positions during his military career, the last being that of the legal advisor to the IDF in Judea and Samaria. So you can already hear from that that indeed he is an expert to take us through this. Before that, previous positions within the IDF also included that of the staff judge advocate for the General Staff Command and the legal advisor to the IDF in the Gaza Strip. So welcome this evening, Yair. And I'm going to hand over to you to start us off, to maybe give us a little bit of the context first, so that we can understand when we talk about annexation, what is it actually that we're talking about? And then we'll have some opportunities for people to send in comments as well and questions. So if you do have any questions or comments, feel free to post them on YouTube or Facebook, and hopefully we'll be able to pick those up. Yair, over to you.
Hi, good evening to everyone. Lovely to be here with you. I think I'll frame the conversation this evening by saying, first, I'd like to get you acquainted with the geography. I think it's important to understand what we're talking about from a geographic point of view, and then to talk about some of the issues as to what Israelis are in the West Bank today. What are their status in the West Bank today, and what would the change be if there was an annexation? So since our time is limited, I suggest we jump straight into things, and I will ask the folks behind the scenes to please put up the PowerPoint presentation. So here we're seeing, again, forgive me if this is obvious, but we're seeing a map of the border of Israel as opposed to as of the demarcation borders of 1948, basically after the War of Independence. What we're seeing is on the left-hand side the Gaza Strip, on the right-hand side in the middle of Israel, or the land of Israel, we're seeing the West Bank, and you can move it, and you can see from north to south. You see the Galilee all the way down to the Negev desert in the south. In the middle, you see the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria. I will talk about them interchangeably. So could you please move to the next slide, just please? Thank you. I say again, that's without a lot of the noise around. You see the three pink sections of the map. We'll leave the Golan Heights out of this discussion for now, but we can see the Gaza Strip and the West Bank in that map. Please, the next one. Next slide. Okay, so now we're seeing a little bit more of what we're talking about. Not a large area, but neither area, and they're not contiguous, so that there is no connection, no physical connection between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Jerusalem is in the midst of the West Bank, as you can see. I can't show you with my cursor here, but you can see in the center of the West Bank is the city of Jerusalem, Israel's capital. Please, next one, please. Okay, what we're seeing here is a more interesting map. Gaza is off of the map right now. What we're seeing here is the official map of the Oslo Agreements. And we're seeing different areas. We're seeing areas A, B, and C of the map. Area A, the brownish areas, are areas that are under full Palestinian control. We're talking about areas that are mostly the urban areas of the West Bank, from the north to the south, from Jenin and Nablus and Tulkarem and Qalqilia, Ramallah, El Bira, Bethlehem, and Hebron. And to the east, you see Jericho. Those are areas that are under complete control of both from a civilian point of view and also a defense point of view, a security point of view, under Palestinian authorities' authority. The areas that are yellowish are areas B. Those are areas that are they're smaller Palestinian communities. Areas, thank you for making it larger. Areas that are under Israeli security administration and Palestinian civilian administration. What does that mean? It means that if some security event takes place in those areas, the IDF is responsible for that. There we go. Whereas the school curriculum or licensing of vehicles is the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority. And the rest of the areas that are white, are Area C. Those are areas that Israel still controls. Israel military government still controls, both from a civilian point of view and a military security point of view. It's important to understand that as we move forward. All of the areas that are with Israeli settlements are within Area C. So in the white areas of the West Bank. That we can see, if you could get on to the next one, it would be, I would thank you. No, you went backwards. If you could move forward, please. Next one, thank you. This is also, I know that they're very busy maps, but it's important to understand that you're seeing the same map of the West Bank with A, B, and C, but you're also seeing the way the security fence, the red line that's running along more or less along the border between Israel and the West Bank is the security fence, and it's important to understand that some of the security fence is within the Palestinian Authority or Palestinian territory, whatever you want to call it, and it includes in some areas that are within the the settlement areas, and it's important to note that as well. Much of the fence encompasses areas that the settlements are within. We can move to the next one, again, to give you some context. And I think that this one is already, so there's no official maps of the annexation, the deal of the century, but there is some conceptual maps, and there's some maps that people are starting to work on. So this is important. Is there any way of making this a little bit larger? Because it's important to understand, I don't know, folks behind the scenes. But this is the map, the conceptual map of the annexation according to the American plan. And again, you see some very interesting things here. You see a tunnel, an underground tunnel that's supposedly supposed to be built between Gaza Strip and the West Bank. You're seeing areas that are the bluish areas, or the light blue, whatever color you want to say they are areas that will be Palestinian areas. And if you notice, there are some interesting elements of that. First of all, in the Negev desert in the south, you see two blurbs south of the Gaza Strip. Those are areas today within Israel, which are supposed to would supposedly become Palestinian territories within Israel. They would be under the sovereignty of the Palestinian Authority. And the same is true in the north. It's harder to see because it's not a detailed map, but there are parts of the northern, just north of the West Bank, within Israel with Arab communities that would become part of the Palestinian territories. Now, if you can imagine overlaid over this map the map of the West Bank that I showed you before, and we'll see it in a second, you can understand that there are, depending on how this program, this annexation schedule goes, we will have issues as to how much of the Palestinian territories, as they are today, of the West Bank, remains within Palestinian hands. So let's start with the next slide, please. And the next several slides are slides that have been put together by the Washington Institute for Near East Studies, and with an understanding of what they believe to be the maps that this plan puts forward. So what we're seeing here is the full annexation, supposedly, which would include 29% of the West Bank. It includes areas along the Jordan Valley Rift. That's all the area where you see the word Jordan, the country of Jordan, the kingdom of Jordan, on the east, to the east of the West Bank and to the east of Israel. All along the purple areas are all areas that would be annexed by Israel under this plan, and it would include many of the areas within the Israeli side of the security fence along the green line, if you can see them. And there's many purplish areas. You can see within those areas some interesting facts. You can see the bluish areas within the purple, and those are Israeli settlements that would come under Israeli sovereignty. They're important to understand that those areas would now, according to that, the broadest of the plans would include 130 settlements and roughly 466,000 Israelis who live in the West Bank today. It would also include 78 Palestinian communities and roughly 109,500 Palestinians. That's the expansive or the full annexation option, which appears to at present not to be on the table, but we don't know. Let's move to the next one, which is a narrower version of the annexation option. Again, this doesn't include the Jordan Valley as we saw it before, but it does include almost all of the settlements that are within the barrier. Okay, that's another option that is being talked about, and you can see all of the purple within this map. It's a smaller area, but it's got. If we said earlier that the broadest of the plan would have 29% of the West Bank or Judea and Samaria now under Israeli sovereignty, it's much less than that. But whereas before it was 466,000 Israelis, it would now be 358,000 Israelis. Most of the largest and of the settlements are within the areas within the security fence that exists today in the West Bank, and it would also include 19,000 Palestinians. Now, what seems to be bandied about in the last couple of weeks are the next two possible slides, and let's go to the first of those to an even narrower first step of the annexation. Can we go to now? This would be for any of you who know Israeli geography. This is the town. The blue blurb here is the town of Ma'ale Adumim. It's one of the largest West Bank communities. It's just to the east of Jerusalem. Literally, as you're coming down from Mount Scopus towards Jericho, you go by a very large settlement on your right-hand side. It's got 41,000 people, and one plan is to only annex that settlement as a first step in the annexation plan. Another plan, possible plan, and that's let's go to the next and the last of this selection of slides, is Gush Etzion, or the Etzion Block, which is south of Jerusalem, near the town of Bethlehem, and it includes roughly 96 communities, and the number of 96,000 Israelis. From a historical point of view, many Israelis see this as an area that should revert to Israel in any kind of solution moving forward. And in both the Ma'ale Adumim and the Gush Etzion solution, there's not certain how many Palestinians would be within those annexed territories, but we'll have to see. In the Ma'ale Adumim option, there's very few. In the Gush Etzion option, there are a lot more, and but not tens of thousands. It's very few thousands or hundreds of people that would be Palestinians who would be under Israeli control. This seems to be, both of those seem to be under within the thinking of the current Defense Minister Gantz and Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi's thoughts that there should be as few Palestinians as possible, and that we should come to some sort of an arrangement with the international community as a first step, and that this should be something that is done not necessarily with discussions with the Palestinians. We can take the slides off, unless I don't know if there's any questions that have come up on that already, or if you have any questions, Leah, because I then want to talk about what law applies to Israelis living in the West Bank today. So
I think that would be helpful before we get to any other comments and questions.
Okay.
It would be good to understand a little bit maybe what law applies to Israelis living in those areas, but also briefly about what law would currently applies to Palestinians living in those areas.
So I want to differentiate between two types of areas of law. One of them is the legal status today of Israelis living in the West Bank, and then what is the legal status of the land that Israeli settlements are on. Okay, vis-a-vis the legal status of Israelis living in the West Bank, you can sort of talk about administrative law and civil law, criminal law. What happens when or municipal law? How are the communities there run? Are they all run by the same law that applies to the Palestinians or not? And the truth in that is that there are the Knesset. In lectures that I give, I try to explain to people that, for instance, what kind of income tax do Israelis pay in living in the West Bank? And the truth is that the Knesset has passed laws that have done what's called extraterritorial jurisdiction regarding several laws of the Knesset, so that they apply directly to Israelis living in the West Bank. And so in many areas, that is the case. In some cases, the military legislature has applied similar Israeli laws or regulations to people and living in the West Bank. Okay, that said, and I can give you examples. What happens, for instance, if an Israeli commits a crime in the West Bank? An Israeli citizen commits a crime, and he will be put on trial in an Israeli court within Israel, for the most part. Although he could hypothetically be put on trial in a military court, where the Palestinians are put on trial. But as a matter of policy, the government of Israel and the Department of Justice has decided that Israelis, for them almost always, who commit crimes in the West Bank, are put on trial in Israeli courts within Israel. So and there's an intricate legal way of doing that. How can someone who is committing a crime in an area that is not under Israeli sovereignty be put on trial? And I won't bore you with the details, but there is guidance through legal precedents on that. The act that the person commits is something that would be considered a crime within Israeli law, and that is, for the most part, how people are put on trial within Israel. Administrative law. Let's go to municipal law. The communities there, what law applies to them? From how do people pay their rates, and how do they have That is all done through either that extraterritorial use of Israeli Knesset laws, or through military legislation, which applies basically much of the same Israeli existing legislation regarding municipal affairs as exists within Israeli communities in Israel. Okay, so that
So,
people, yeah, go ahead.
sorry to jump in. So if I sort of listen to you, I'm just trying to make sure that our listeners, I think, understand. If we think about it, in terms of what would change for an Israeli living, say, in Ma'ale Adumim, from before annexation to after annexation, would they feel much difference, or would
From
it
all of
more
those
or
areas,
less be the
from
same?
from all of those points of view, it would be more or less the same. But there are some major changes that would occur because, as I mentioned before, there's a distinction between the laws that apply to people as people, or to communities as communities, and as opposed to land law. How would you decide land law? How would you decide on eminent domain? How would you decide on zoning? Today, the land law that exists in the West Bank is land law. Some of it goes back to the Turkish era, to the Ottoman era. Zoning laws, zoning meaning planning laws, are laws that apply, are Jordanian laws that still apply in the West Bank. Okay, those laws would now no longer be in place, and the Israeli land law, and Israeli zoning laws would be the ones that apply, and that is a major difference because much of the previous laws, the laws that exist in the West Bank, are archaic in many senses and have not been changed because of international law that allows only certain changes in the law to be made, and the military legislator is cautious as to the laws that he changes that existed in 1967 when Israel conquered the West Bank. So that would be a major change in many senses. Again, criminal law would be applied completely. All the municipal laws, you wouldn't have to do all this acrobatics of having extra territorial application of the law, etc. And the same is true for today as well. When someone is suing in civil cases, is suing his neighbor, again, there's all kinds of acrobatics that need to be done for that. That would no longer be the case. It would make it a lot easier. There's always cases. There's even today there's very difficult cases that will not find the solutions. The things that people on a day-to-day basis don't think about, but for instance, when there's a traffic accident between an Israeli and a Palestinian in the West Bank, what law applies to that? What insurance company pays? Okay, those are the intricacies of the system that exists today. Excuse me. Pardon me. That would probably go away for the most part, but some of them wouldn't, because the Palestinians and Israelis would still be driving on many of the same roads. So
If we move
for the
to
Palestinians,
yeah.
so the Palestinians today, most of the laws that apply to them, there's several different. I like to say that there's seven sources of law, and I won't give you my long hour-and-a-half lecture on the laws that apply to the West Bank, but they include chronological. There's Turkish, British mandatory when the British still controlled the West Bank and Israel, so there's still legislation from that period that applies to the West Bank. There's Jordanian legislation that was applied from the era between 1967 and 1948 and 1967, and there's law that applies from 1960, Israeli military legislation that applies from 1967 through till today. On top of that, there are three other types of laws that apply. One of them is Israeli administrative law, and that is an interesting phenomenon. It doesn't exist in many places in the world, but Palestinians, if they feel wronged by the Israeli military government, can apply or can petition the Israeli High Court of Justice, and there's hundreds of cases heard yearly by the Supreme Court, which sits as the High Court of Justice, that were petitioned through by Palestinians in issues regarding what they believe to be their rights on administrative matters. There's areas of international law that arise as well, the laws of armed conflict in times when there are conflicts, and the law of occupation. And as we speak, I've forgotten the seventh source of law, and it'll come to me in a second. But so the Palestinians who live within areas A, B, and C are only governed by Palestinian. In areas A and B are governed by Palestinian legislation. In areas B, on civilian and security matters, but in areas B, if they commit a crime against Israelis within areas B, they are liable to be put on trial in Israeli military courts. The same is true if they affect Israelis, even if they do them in area C. Israel sees them if they're captured or they're taken into captivity. When they're under Israeli authority, they can be put on trial in Israeli military courts, and that is certainly the case in areas A that are under Israeli control till today. But a Palestinian who punches his neighbor in Hebron will not be put on trial in an Israeli court, nor will he be able to sue or take the mayor of Hebron to court in an Israeli court in an administrative matter. And if he has a neighborly disagreement with one of his neighbors, he will have to take them to a local court and not to a Israeli civil court. The cases become more complicated when there's disagreements or issues that arise between Israelis and Palestinians. And in those cases today, and I would imagine in those mixed cases in the future, there'll be issues as to which forum are the proper forum for those matters. So it's a complicated story at the best of times. And right now, we're not sure where things are going with the annexation. It's certainly something very much in the air. We're hearing many experts. We're hearing on the one side the right wing or the settlers are not pleased with Trump's plan because they say that it also has stipulations. I didn't talk about that part of it. I wanted to give you background about the geography and the law, but there's issues here as to whether Israel, the plan actually calls for acceptance of the two-state solution, and many of the right on the right say that's unacceptable to them, and that that is something that cannot be acceptable under any circumstances. They don't like what their understanding are the maps, and some of them are not. They don't go far enough. That the broader, the first of the slides that I showed you regarding the Trump plan does not go far enough as to the areas that would be under Israeli sovereignty as moving forward. On the other hand, there are people, of course, who think that this goes too far, and that this, and we're hearing a lot of background noise, and not only background noise from the Jordanians who are saying, if you have any thoughts of annexing the Jordan Valley, we have a problem with us. It puts into question the continued security cooperation that exists between Israel and Jordan. It puts into question the continued existence of the peace, the pact, the agreement that exists between Israel and Jordan. We've heard in a very unheard of and unprecedented, I think on the 12th of June, an emissary for the United Arab Emirates wrote a piece in one of the most important Israeli dailies, Yediot Ahronot, saying to Israel, if you want to encourage moderate Arab regimes to continue to have continue to have negotiations and also cooperation between Israel and themselves, you have to decide whether you want to do that and also have annexation, because the two won't go together. If you want annexation, that will be the end of cooperation between us, and that's an issue because one of Prime Minister Netanyahu's is very proud of the fact that he's moved forward considerably in regional cooperation with Arab, both in a quiet manner and a less quiet manner. We're hearing a lot of talk about many members of the European Union who are saying that they're opposed to this and that they might take actions and sanctions against Israel. It's already creating in an American polarized situation, is creating a lot of issues between the Democrats and Republicans within the American administration. I think the British Prime Minister has come out against as well, and in Israeli terms, it's a balagan right now. And I'm sure the government stipulated in advance that it was going to move forward as of the 1st of July. No one's certain as to whether that is actually going to happen, yes or no, but you never know in this part of the world and in this country. And Netanyahu seems to be very much interested in doing one form of annexation or another within the next few weeks, and it could be the first stage, the Ma'ale Adumim or Gush Etzion stages, to get some footwork on the ground. His Gantz and Ashkenazi and the Blue and White Party would probably go along with that because they don't want to annex areas where there are large Palestinian populations, and we'll have to wait and see how things develop. Obviously, I didn't even mention what the Palestinian Authority thinks about this, and this could put into question the whole issue of the continued existence of cooperation between the Palestinian Authority's police, their armed forces, and the IDF in the West Bank, or put into question the continued existence of the Oslo Accords as we see them. And then that would raise, are we about to begin another round of intifada? And the latest I heard yesterday that the Palestinians seem to be the Palestinian Authority seems to be very concerned because there seems to be apathy in the streets of the West Bank on this matter. Many people are now connecting that to the COVID-19 pandemic because people are more concerned with that right now than the possibility of Israel annexing part of the West Bank, yes or no.
So I just
lots of issues.
Yeah, lots of issues. So I want to jump in with a few questions that have come in from the audience. And I think I want to pick up, there's a few coming, so I think we have to try to answer in short chunks so that we can take as many as possible. So the first one that I wanted to pick up is from someone on Twitter, Baba Mush, is asking whether the annexation plan is in the law and has it been voted on,
No.
and what exactly is the schedule. So
there's we don't know. The initial schedule was to have something on the ground, something specifically already annexed by the 1st of July. We're a week away from that. It doesn't look like that is going to happen, but stranger things have happened in this part of the world. But as of now, there's nothing in the law, and it has not been voted on yet.
So before I get to the question from Andrew Keane, who is posting on Facebook, I want to Andrew, our good friend Andrew, I want to just throw one in for myself. I've had the pleasure, or I don't know if it's a pleasure, of talking about this issue with progressive Jews from around the world, and I was recently on a panel discussion on Sunday in Australia. On the same topic. And one of the journalists speaking on the panel said, well, this is maybe an issue in the diaspora, but actually in Israel at the moment, hardly anyone seems to care about. It's quite low down in the list of what Israelis really care about. How would you see that? I think you showed a statistic that like only 4% think that this is a topic that they really should concern themselves with right now, whereas 29% are concerned about unemployment. I don't know what's your feeling from on the ground in
Well, I
Jerusalem
think
on
right
that.
now there's a real concern about the spike that there exists in the number of new cases of COVID, and so there's many Israelis are now taking that into. Are we about to start a second wave? Of course, they're talking about nearly 30% of Israelis who are unemployed right now, or the numbers have dropped from 1 million Israelis to roughly 750,000 Israelis, and many Israelis are feeling the pinch in their pocketbooks, and that's a major concern. That said, there is not, in the last 2 weeks or so, there's not a news broadcast that does not begin with the evening news on any of the three major channels does not begin with 10 minutes about the potential ramifications, positive or negative, depending what your politics are, of the annexation deal. The fact that there seems to be a small window of opportunity for the government who, if they want to move forward because of what's happening in American politics and the need to move forward on this, while before getting too heavily into the American election season as we move closer to the November election in the United States. And so I didn't give you a great answer to that, but there is an interest in the topic. But I also saw the number of only 5% seeing as the most important topic. There's certainly COVID and the economy are very much a concern, and the fact that Israelis who love to travel will not be able to travel this summer. But that's another issue.
So I'm going to go to the question from Andrew
I
Keane.
can't wait for a question from Andrew.
Of course. So there's a lot of backlash regarding annexations from progressive Jews globally. Um, as the chair of the IMPJ, I'm putting that into Andrew's question. What would you say is the general sentiment of Reform Jews in Israel on the current annexation plan?
So I'd say that there's no general sentiment amongst this. That's the difference between ourselves and our constituents than progressive Jews around the world. Uh, there's no there's a wide array of Israeli Reform Jews, okay, and people represent and have beliefs and have political affiliations that are completely different than there would be in perhaps more in the liberal communities in Europe or the United States or other places in the world. That that having been said, it's an issue that um, my board has decided to take on in the sense that just a couple of days ago we passed a resolution which begins a process of examining the issue for the movement. What kind of position, if at all, we want to take on the matter. Because we, as opposed to the other liberal movements, religious movements around the world, do not take part in the politics of Israel. And so I don't see ourselves looking into the matter from a strictly political point of view. But the resolution that we passed is a resolution that states that we would look into the process of determining whether there are issues regarding values, morals, religion, democracy, and Zionism, which need to be examined in the context of the annexation. And I think that in any case where one of the concerns that might come up, and again, I'm not deciding it because we're going to go through a major process on this, which will include our rabbis, our rabbinic council, which is the Israeli rabbinic, the Maram, which is the council of progressive rabbis, reform rabbis in Israel, a group of rabbis who are community rabbis or congregational rabbis, and they don't necessarily align one another because they're completely. What do our synagogue presidents think? And we're going to open it up to town hall meetings. We're going to have discussions starting tomorrow night within the Israel Religious Action Center. Our RAC, the American RAC, the equivalent of the RAC. We're going to bring it back to my board with any suggested ideas regarding how we move forward on this, and then we'll bring it to our National Council of Reform Judaism, which is the highest body, to oversee it and to decide whether we want to take a position or not. We're cognizant of the need to be very careful, and as it is, there's often folks who think that when the American movement comes out with a statement, that it's actually the statement of the Israeli movement, and it's not, of course. And we are cognizant of the need to find a fine line of how we do not alienate some of our own synagogue members, and I think that is why we went on a path that leads to questions regarding values and morals and the religious issues, and again democracy, and in the understanding that it's within the Zionist framework as well, because we're a Zionist movement within Israel. So I don't know whether that answers Andrew. I'm sure he's going to give me some heat for that answer, but we've had other heated discussions before, and I'll enjoy the rapport.
So I think what you're describing in many ways is actually also partly the conversation that is happening around the progressive Jewish world. I think while there is a sort of annexation black and white view in some quarters, I think there are a lot of progressive liberal reform Jews also around the world who are saying, well, it depends what annexation means. I think one of the questions that often comes up, and certainly for me personally also is a little bit of a crunch point, is the question around what rights would Palestinians enjoy who, through the annexation process, would suddenly be living in the state of Israel. And because as a Zionist, I believe in a Jewish and democratic state. So a scenario that would see 100,000 or more Palestinians now being brought under Israeli law and inside the state, but without the rights to, for example, vote in elections. I think that's where we really come up against the wall of saying, actually, there are some morals involved here, and some, real biblical laws that we feel are important, that we should treat the stranger who dwells in our midst like a citizen. So I think that's really important conversation to have, and I think that is partly the conversation that we are having as a liberal movement in the UK. I want to ask you.
One thing. Can I add one thing to that? Because one of the issues, I know that some of the discussions that have begun already, and again, there's no foregone conclusion on this, and I'm really being very open to any possibility here, but the issues that you brought up are very obvious. One of the issues that we will have to delve into is a question of whether this puts a real damper on any possibility of continued peace process, and whether that issue can be made devoid of the political nature of it, and say that is also a matter of values, morals, and religion that need to move forward with peace. And that is an interesting, because I'm not sure where that's going to go to in the context of the discussion that my movement in Israel is going to have on that, and we will see, because does it move too much into what we consider the political, and we're not a political movement. I need to stress that again. We will have to see how that moves, and it's beyond the questions that you brought up, which are the easier ones, so to speak, in this issue, because I think we all agree on that one. I do in any case, but I just want to be careful, because I don't want to make. We've decided, this is literally hot off the press, and many of my own constituents won't even know that we passed these resolutions 2 nights ago on a long Zoom meeting that with all of my board on it, or most of my board on it. So.
Wonderful. I'm going to bring in another question from Facebook, but But I want to give you the question so that you can maybe think about it while you're answering the other questions. So I'll give you my question. It's just been announced that the new Israeli ambassador to the UK will be Tzipi Hotovely, who is at the moment the settlements minister, I believe, still. If you were in our feet, what would be the first question that you would ask Ambassador Tzipi Hotovely when she arrives concerning this issue? So I'm going to put that to you so you can maybe give us the question. But just before that, I want to pick up the question from Steve on Facebook. Can the area continue as it is, or does something, whatever that may be, need to happen? I think what Steve is playing at is, what is the sudden urgency about annexation, right? What has anything changed that we need to talk about annexation now,
so I think that
other
there's two.
than Netanyahu's trial?
Right. So that I think that Netanyahu's trial on the one hand, and the need to sort of change the attention span, or not the attention span, of the attention of the press and his Likud supporters, but also what I mentioned before, which is what's happening in the United States and the window of opportunity that exists because of American politics and the fact that there's no certainty as to what will happen as we move towards November, and whether and in the next, after we move into the height of the American political season, there won't be a lot of opportunities to move forward with this, because there will not be a lot of attentiveness to this issue there. The other thing, if I understood the question maybe a little bit in a different way, it will require passing laws in the Knesset. This will require, if a country decides to annex another piece of another area. We've done this before in the last 53 years. Once when we made the municipal boundaries of Jerusalem larger than they were before, and the next part is 19 different parts of East Jerusalem, but also some villages in the West Bank at the time, and also, of course, the Golan Heights, which were annexed by Israel in the early 1980s, and those are issues that require as well. And at the time, there was obviously a lot of flack because many countries don't recognize Israel's annexation of those territories even till today. So. And I'm sure that might be the case, except for the United States, under this administration moving forward, which makes it also complex. It's the same as very few countries accepted Jordanian annexation of the West Bank between 48 and 67. Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the only countries that did so was Great Britain and Pakistan, if I'm not mistaken. So
let's
your
come to the question. What should we be asking Tzipi Hotovely? Charlie is also interested in that one.
So let me say that Tzipi Hotovely is a very smart woman, and her previous position was the Minister for Diaspora Affairs, and I think that as progressive Jews, you have I think you have an opportunity to re-educate her on matters regarding the different streams of Judaism, and to make certain that she understands that how integral progressive Judaism, whether it's, I know that this, I'm not sure I'm allowed to say this at this forum, but Reform Judaism and Liberal Judaism and Masorti Judaism in Britain are an integral part of the Jewish community in Britain, and how important and how much that the communities for the most part respect one another. And I think she can learn a lot about that in that sense. I think that is something that I would encourage you to think about how to do. What do we talk when we talk? She has not had a lot of time as the Minister for Settlement Affairs, and she apparently will be replaced by someone who does know a lot more about our world. Tzachi Hanegbi is another minister who supposedly will be replacing her as the settlement portfolio, whatever that means right now. I think that perhaps trying to take the issue less to the political and more to the issues that we discussed before, And what is her position on the possibility that Palestinians living under the sovereignty of Israel will not have political rights as Israelis? And what does that mean? What is the expectation? Does that not smack of regimes that we don't want to be associated with? And I think that those are some of the issues that I would take to her, and she will have to deal with those through the press and through other areas immediately, I assume, because your government is not in tune with the Netanyahu government on this issue, as far as I understand. So I think that that's where I would take it, because I think as progressive Jews, we need to talk about values, and we need to talk about morals, and we need to talk about our understanding, as you described them, Rabbi Mühlstein, about I don't usually
I'm
we
not
work
sure
a lot
you
together.
ever called me Rabbi Mühlstein.
But I'm being very officious. But I think that those are matters that need to be discussed, and then the fact that the fact that we remember that we were strangers in the land of Egypt, and that it's mentioned 38 different times in the Tanakh, and the fact that how does she deal with that, those kind of issues as an Orthodox Jewish woman, and I think that she considers herself to be an Orthodox Jewish woman. So I think another challenge is for her to call you rabbi, and to get her to call you rabbi. And I think that would be a very eye-opening, and I challenge you to get her to do that.
We shall work on that together. I'm sure Rabbi Charlie Baginski will also work on that one as well. So a couple of questions came in. I'm not going to pick them up separately, but they're sort of in the same vein. And I think this is going to have to, unfortunately, be our last question. Whether this is really, why should we as diaspora Jews get a say in this issue? Isn't annexation simply an issue that the State of Israel, the government of the State of Israel, the elected government of the State of Israel should be deciding on? Or, should we just stay out of it?
So I'll give you the usually I'm asked this question vis-a-vis issues of religious pluralism in Israel. And I'm assuming, and I know you are, Leah, that you are a fervent Zionist, and many of the people who are asking the questions are asking them out of a love of Israel, an honest to goodness love of Israel, and the concern for Israel and the future of Israel and the values of the State of Israel. And I think that as Zionists, I know that you support the State of Israel, but sometimes you have complaints against the government of the State of Israel. And as Jews who are often identified with what happens in the State of Israel, I think you're allowed to state your points of view. And if you have a bone to pick with policies of the State of Israel, the government of the State of Israel, you should be able to speak them. At the same time, I think that sometimes on security-related issues, many Israelis feel, if your sons are not in the army, don't lecture us. But these are issues, and we're talking about issues regarding morals and values and religion, and the way we see these issues, and the democratic nature of the State of Israel. And as Zionists, I think that you're allowed to ask those questions. I don't have a problem with that whatsoever. I think it makes us part of a larger Jewish community. It makes me feel that you care about what's happening here. Now, we might not agree on everything, and we won't. And but it's a need to understand here that diaspora, the Jewish peoplehood issue is a fascinating issue, and Israelis have to learn a lot more about Jews abroad. And not only is Jews abroad need to learn about Israel, and I think that we as a reform movement would have much to gain from that.
Thank you. That's a really lovely way of ending. I wanna ask the people backstage to just push David Shaw's comment into the screen so that people can see this. Because and I just wanted to pick up on one thing that you mentioned about security. That when it comes to security issues, often Israelis feel that we as diaspora Jews should stay out of it because we don't have any stake in it. Although, of course, if we actually look at what's happened when there have been waves of aggression between Israel and the Palestinians, oftentimes it had very real security consequences for our communities
Of course.
as well. But I think this idea of this mutual learning and engagement, Rabbi Charlie Baginski is just, we're going to put her comment in here too, is just picking up, because it's really that I think this relationship is so important, and certainly for me, one of the things that has been really the greatest gift of being allowed to take on this role as the international chair of Arzenu, which is, as you know, not always easy, is the gift of being able to really build those strong relationships and to be able to share them. So I really want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. You are super busy. You have 10,000 other things, and I just sort of jump in and send you a WhatsApp and say, you up for it? And you always say yes. So big thank you from all of us. I think it's been a really enlightening hour. I'm sure everyone really was interested in the discussion, and it will hopefully lead to further discussions within our movement, just as it is as it's happening in your movement. Just a heads up for our viewers this evening, that this is basically the launch of a new mini-series as part of our education hub, focusing on Israel. So next week, we'll be back here talking with someone from the Israel Religious Action Center. Yair spoke about them, to talk about the work that they're doing about tackling racism in Israeli society. We felt that was a good topic to think about as we all think about Black Lives Matters at the moment, and to get the Israeli angle on it. The series isn't just about conflict issues. It's also about some of the wonderful things. So we'll also have a session on the new Israeli Reform Siddur, which has just been finished, and I think we can put our orders in. So hopefully looking forward to welcoming many of you back in the next few weeks. And yeah, I think your dog is saying, I
Yes,
want
Mark,
your
but
attention.
I want to give a plug to something else if any of you are up to it.
Absolutely.
On this Friday night, Friday evening, we're having a Kabbalat Shabbat. Some of the communities in Jerusalem. I'm from Jerusalem. At the first station, my dog is as part of the Gay Pride Shabbat, and it's the first time that we're having an open celebration during this COVID period. I apologize for my dog, but it's important. It's on Zoom and Facebook, and I would love for as many of you as possible. I'll send you the link, and if any of you want to take part in that, it's a very special place, and it's going to be a very special Kabbalat Shabbat in Jerusalem, where I hope hundreds of people will show up and stay apart enough, despite the thoughts about this. So thank you, Andre. I see you, Andre, there. It's lovely to see you, and I know we've been working on some of these issues and talking back and forth. So I look forward to seeing you there. Toda rabba, chaverim, and I apologize if I went a little bit into the weeds at the beginning, and I hope I didn't lose any of you.
No, this was exactly the point of it. It was an opportunity to dive a bit deeper, and not just to have the discussion about what we all think, but to get a little bit of facts. So thank you very much, and we'll be able to share the link to that special Kabbalat Shabbat service as well on our social media. So thank you again. Thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. Thank you very much to everyone behind the scenes for the wonderful tech as always. Have a wonderful evening.
Laila Tov.